They said I stole my sister's gold necklace. They searched my room, called me jealous, and kicked me out like I was trash. 5 years later at Christmas dinner, my grandmother pulled out that exact necklace and said, "You left this at my house, sweetheart. I've kept it for you." My whole family went silent. And for once, they saw what they had really thrown away. I was 9 the first time I noticed my parents look at me differently. It was a chilly October afternoon in Brookhaven, Indiana. I had just come home from school with a math test folded in my backpack, the red C- glaring up at me like a wound. My hands were sweaty as I handed it to my mom at the kitchen counter. She barely glanced at it before letting out a small sigh, the kind that said more than any words could. Meanwhile, my younger sister Brielle came skipping in behind me, waving a spelling quiz with a perfect score. Mom's face lit up instantly. She clapped her hands together, her voice warm and proud as she hugged Brielle and praised her for being such a smart little girl. I stood there holding my test, waiting for some kind of acknowledgement. Maybe a gentle reminder that one bad grade didn't define me. But all I got was a quiet suggestion to try harder next time. That was the moment something shifted. It wasn't loud or dramatic, it was quiet. Subtle. But it stuck with me. For the first 9 years of my life, I thought we were a normal, happy family. My dad worked as a mechanic at the local auto shop. My mom was a secretary at Brookhaven Elementary. We lived in a modest 2-bedroom ranch house on a quiet street. We weren't rich, but we weren't struggling either. My sister and I shared a bunk bed and fought over the remote like any siblings. I thought we were the same in our parents' eyes. But after that test, things began to change. Slowly at first. Then all at once. When I asked for a new backpack because mine had torn at the seam, my mom said we'd wait until Christmas. A week later, Brielle got a brand new one with pink glitter and her initials embroidered on the front. When Dad took us to the movies, Brielle always got to pick. When we went shopping, she came home with new outfits while I was told mine still fit fine. At first, I tried to brush it off. Maybe I was being sensitive. Maybe Brielle just needed more attention because she was younger. But as the years went by, it became impossible to ignore. By the time I was in middle school, the favoritism wasn't just occasional, it was a pattern. Brielle was always center stage, and I was left in the shadows. If I aced a science project, I got a polite nod. If Brielle brought home a participation ribbon, the whole fridge became her trophy wall. The worst part wasn't the gifts or the attention. It was the way they looked at her. Like she was everything good and bright in the world, and the way they looked at me, like I was the one who didn't quite fit. Still, I kept trying. I joined the debate team, stayed up late studying, volunteered at the library. I did everything I could to earn their praise. I thought if I worked hard enough, if I was good enough, maybe they'd see me again. But no matter what I did, Brielle always came first. She was charming in a way that made people lean in. Her smile, her laugh, the way she told stories like she was born to be adored. Teachers loved her, neighbors loved her. Even strangers at the grocery store would comment on how pretty and polite she was. My mom beamed every time someone complimented her. I remember one afternoon during the summer before 8th grade, I had spent hours cleaning the garage as a surprise for my dad. Sweaty and covered in dust, I waited on the porch when he pulled into the driveway. He walked past me, barely noticing before stepping inside. Moments later, Brielle shouted from the kitchen that she had baked cookies using a pre-made dough. My dad ruffled her hair and said she was amazing. That night, I cried quietly in my room, telling myself it didn't matter. That love wasn't something you had to earn. But deep down, I didn't believe it. It was around that time that Brielle started getting everything handed to her. Her own phone at age 10. Dance classes in the city. A weekend trip with mom to Chicago just because. I, on the other hand, got used to hearing the word no. No, we can't afford that right now. No, you don't need it. No, we already did that with Brielle. The double standards became so normal that I stopped expecting fairness. I started saving babysitting money if I wanted anything new. I bought secondhand clothes. I learned to be self-reliant because no one was going to hand me anything. What hurt most was the emotional distance. The way my mom would lean in when Brielle spoke, listening like every word mattered. The way my dad always made time for her softball games but never came to my spelling bees. Sometimes I caught them whispering at night in the kitchen laughing about something Brielle said or did. I stood at the top of the stairs holding my breath waiting to hear my name. It never came. Even so, I never hated Brielle. How could I? She was my sister. I remembered sharing bunk beds and late-night talks about monsters under the bed. I remembered how we used to play dress-up and build forts out of blankets. I loved her even when it hurt. But as she grew into the golden child, something in her changed. She became more entitled, more aware of the power she held in our family. If she cried, the world stopped. If I cried, I was told to stop being dramatic. By high school, she was the queen of everything. Student council, homecoming court, cheer squad captain. Meanwhile, I kept to myself. I studied. I worked. I did what I had to do. But I stopped hoping for more. I stopped trying to be noticed. Still, there was a part of me hidden deep that believed maybe one day they'd realize I had been there all along. That I had been the one listening, the one helping, the one caring. Not for attention, but because I loved them. I just didn't know how long it would take for them to see it. Or if they ever would. I spent most of high school watching my own life from the sidelines. Brielle was everywhere. Her face was on every hallway poster for class president, every announcement for the cheer squad, every homecoming nomination. She breezed through high school like a girl born to be adored. Meanwhile, I kept my head down, did my work, and made it through each day like I was on a different planet. I took a part-time job at Beanhouse Cafe my sophomore year. It was nothing glamorous, wiping tables, taking orders, burning my fingers on the espresso machine, but it gave me something to hold on to. I liked the routine. I liked earning my own money, even if it was barely enough to cover school supplies and the occasional thrift store run. Brielle, of course, didn't need a job. She didn't even have to ask for things. A new phone showed up before her birthday. Concert tickets appeared on her pillow with a handwritten note from Dad. When she wanted to take a weekend trip with her friends to Chicago, my parents handed her a stack of 20s like it was nothing. They were so proud of her. Not just proud, obsessed. I came home from a long shift one evening to find my mom and dad sitting around the dinner table with Jake, her new boyfriend. He was tall, clean-cut, confident in that effortless way boys from money always seem to be. His family owned a chain of auto dealerships, which instantly made him Dad's favorite person on earth. They were laughing at some story he was telling, something about his football coach. I stood in the doorway for a full minute before anyone even noticed I was there. Dad glanced over and nodded. "Oh, hey, Camille. There's lasagna on the stove." Then he turned back to Jake, his eyes glowing. I heated up a plate and ate in silence at the kitchen counter while their laughter floated in from the other room. Jake stayed until nearly midnight. I washed the dishes alone while Mom told Brielle to walk him out, giggling like they were co-conspirators in some fairy tale romance. I don't know when exactly I stopped trying to be part of it. Maybe around the time I started applying to colleges without asking for their input. I figured there was no point. They barely knew what I was interested in anyway. I chose Midwest Community College because it was affordable and only 2 hours away. I applied for grants and scholarships, took out small loans, and found a shared apartment with 2 girls I met on a student forum. I packed my things quietly the summer after graduation, loaded up the used Toyota I had saved up for over 2 years, and left without a family send-off. Brielle posted a whole Instagram story about moving into her campus apartment at University of Bloomington. There were balloons matching luggage, selfies with Mom and Dad in front of her dorm. I didn't even get a text. College was hard, but it was mine. I studied sociology and worked evenings at the student center front desk. I made friends, slowly kept my world small, and sent most of my earnings back into books and rent. Every dollar mattered. Every hour counted. I came home for Thanksgiving that first year mostly out of obligation. It felt strange walking into the house I used to know. The walls had new paint. Brielle's face was in new picture frames. My old bedroom had been turned into a yoga room. I had to sleep on the couch. Dinner was tense. My parents asked Brielle about her classes, her professors, her upcoming sorority formal. They asked Jake about his internship and his plans after graduation. No one asked me about my job or what I was studying. At one point, I tried to bring up a research paper I was proud of. My mom nodded politely and said that sounded nice, then turned to Brielle and asked about her dress for the winter formal. I smiled through the rest of the evening, told myself it didn't matter, but the truth was I cried the whole drive back to campus. After that, I stopped coming home for breaks. I picked up extra shifts during holidays, volunteered at the local shelter when campus was quiet. It hurt less to be alone than to be invisible in a room full of people who were supposed to love you. The only person who noticed was my grandmother. Every holiday without fail, I'd get a handwritten card in the mail. Sometimes there was a $5 bill folded inside. Sometimes just a note in her careful cursive. Thinking of you, dear. Love, Grandma Margaret. She didn't ask me to come home. She didn't pressure me to forgive or explain. She just reached out steady and quiet, like a hand resting gently on my back in the dark. It meant more than she probably knew. I started writing her back. Just a few lines at first. Then longer letters. I told her about my classes, my coworkers, how I liked working at the campus garden when the weather was nice. I didn't mention my parents. She didn't bring them up either. That silence between us felt like understanding. One spring during finals week, I got a package from her. Inside was a tin of lemon cookies she'd baked, wrapped carefully in wax paper. There was a note tucked beneath the lid. For energy, for strength, for you. I sat on my dorm floor and cried. She was the only one who made me feel like I was still someone's granddaughter. The next time I visited home, if you could even call it home anymore, was for my cousin's graduation party. I stayed for an hour, enough to congratulate her and shake hands. Brielle was there with Jake, surrounded by relatives glowing like the sun. Dad pulled me aside at one point, gave me a stiff hug, and asked how school was going. Good, I said. That was the whole conversation. I left early and didn't look back. It was around that time I realized something that both hurt and comforted me in equal measure. I didn't need them anymore. I missed the idea of family more than the people themselves. And I had learned to live without being seen. That spring, I made the mistake of going home for a long weekend. It was March 2014 and campus had emptied out for spring break. I couldn't afford a trip anywhere and didn't want to spend the whole week alone in my dorm. Sharon, my roommate, was heading to her aunt's in Ohio and had offered to let me tag along, but something in me thought maybe, just maybe, I should give home one more shot. I called my mom 2 days before and asked if it would be okay to come by for a few days. Of course, she said quickly. Your room's still the same. That was a lie. I knew at the moment I walked through the front door. My old bedroom had been turned into a craft space. My childhood desk was gone, replaced by a folding table covered in fabrics and glue guns. The closet was stuffed with seasonal storage. Mom handed me a set of clean towels and said I could sleep on the pull-out couch. Brielle was already there, glowing as always. She greeted me with a hug like nothing had ever been wrong between us. Her nails were perfect, her hair freshly done. She wore a gold chain that sparkled under the hallway light and said casually over dinner that Jake had given it to her for their 1-year anniversary. She leaned toward me across the table, her fingers brushing the pendant. Isn't it beautiful? She asked. It's real gold. Jake had it custom made. It was beautiful and expensive looking. I said something polite and kept eating. That night, while Mom and Dad cleaned up, Brielle stayed in the living room with me. She kept talking about Jake, their future plans, how his parents had invited her on a vacation to Maui that summer. She showed me pictures on her phone, tossed her hair, smiled, like she was living in a dream. At some point, she caught me glancing at her necklace again. You like it? She asked. I nodded. It's nice. She smirked, then stood up and said she was going to bed. I stayed up a little longer, staring at the muted television, trying not to feel out of place in the house I used to call mine. The next morning, everything exploded. I was brushing my teeth when I heard the sharp tone in Brielle's voice downstairs. I wiped my hands on a towel and came out of the bathroom to see her pacing the living room, panic written all over her face. It's gone, she kept saying. It's not in my jewelry case. My parents were already in full search mode. Dad was checking under couch cushions. Mom had a flashlight out, peering beneath furniture. Brielle was near tears, insisting she'd left it on her nightstand. I stood awkwardly in the hallway watching the chaos. I'm sure it'll turn up, I offered. That's when Brielle turned to look at me. You were staring at it last night, she said quietly, her eyes narrow. I blinked. What? She crossed her arms. You were totally fixated on it. Maybe you thought no one would notice if you just borrowed it. My heart dropped into my stomach. I didn't touch your necklace, I said the words slow and deliberate. Dad stood up from where he'd been checking behind the television. You sure about that? I stared at him stunned. Are you seriously asking me that? Mom walked past me and into the guest bathroom. A moment later she called out. Nothing in here either. Then, as if someone had flipped a switch, they all turned to me. Dad's face was hard the same way it used to be when I forgot to take the trash out. Mom looked wounded, like she couldn't believe what she was thinking. Brielle stood in the center of it all, arms folded, eyes smug. I said again, I didn't touch it. Brielle shrugged. All I know is it was here last night. And now it's not. Mom looked at me and shook her head slowly. We know you've had a rough time lately, Camille. Maybe this was just a lapse in judgment. You think I stole it, I said. You actually think I stole from my own sister? No one answered. I couldn't believe it. I felt like I was in a dream, like I was watching a movie where the girl gets falsely accused and no one listens. Only it wasn't a movie, it was my family. And they believed her over me without a second of hesitation. Dad gestured toward the staircase. Let's check your bag. I stood frozen. No, I said. Absolutely not. That just made him angrier. Then you leave us no choice. They searched everything. My duffel bag, my backpack, my wallet. They went through my coat pockets, my toiletries, even my shoes. I just stood there, too shocked to cry, too numb to argue. Of course they found nothing. Because I hadn't taken it. But it didn't matter. The damage was done. Dad crossed his arms, looking disappointed. We always knew you were jealous of Brielle. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw something, tear the walls down, make them see me. But I didn't. I packed my things in silence. As I zipped up my duffel, my mom stood near the doorway, arms crossed, jaw tight. You can stay somewhere else until you're ready to tell us the truth. I looked up at her, my throat burning. The truth is I didn't take it. Then why won't you help us find it? Because I don't owe you anything. She flinched like I'd slapped her. Brielle stood behind her, expression unreadable. I walked out without another word. Sharon let me crash on her floor. She didn't ask for details. Just handed me a blanket and said, stay as long as you need. I didn't cry that night, or the next. Some things hurt too deep for tears. That was the last time I saw my family for 5 years. I moved to Madison 2 weeks later with a borrowed suitcase and $200 to my name. Sharon had a cousin who needed a roommate, and they let me crash in their extra room rent-free until I found work. The apartment was small, barely furnished, but it was quiet and mine, and I was grateful for every inch of it. I picked up a barista job at Blackwood Coffee on Monroe Street. The early morning shifts were rough, especially in winter when the sky stayed dark until after 7, but I got used to the rhythm. Pour, steam, smile, repeat. I memorized regulars' orders and learned to read their moods from the way they held their cups. It was easier than reading my family ever was. At night, I worked part-time at a local senior care facility, Langdon Hills. The job was simple on paper. Clean rooms, check vitals, help residents to bed. But what it really required was patience and presence and gentleness. The kind of gentleness I had almost forgotten existed. There was something comforting about caring for people who didn't expect you to be anything more than exactly who you were. Mr. Becker liked to hum jazz while I brushed his teeth. Miss Tanaka always asked for 2 warm blankets, no matter the season. I found a strange kind of peace in those moments, like I had finally stepped into a life I chose instead of the one I had been forced to survive. While I was scrubbing floors and changing sheets, Brielle was posting photos of rooftop dinners and weekend trips to Napa. She got engaged to Jake that same year. There were engagement photos by the lake, gold foil save the dates, and matching satin bridesmaid robes that showed up on my feed because I hadn't yet unfollowed her. I didn't cry, I didn't react. I just scrolled past like I was skipping an ad for a life that didn't belong to me. School was hard, but I loved it. Sociology felt like something I could finally make sense of, why people did what they did. How systems failed certain people and upheld others. The theories weren't just words in a textbook, they were pieces of my own story finally named. I graduated with honors in 2017 and Langdon Hills offered me a full-time job as a care coordinator. It didn't pay much, but it came with benefits and, more importantly, stability. I took it without hesitation. One evening that fall, I was reviewing shift reports at the front desk when someone knocked gently on the check-in window. "Hey, is Camille working tonight?" I looked up startled. The man on the other side of the glass was tall, a little broader than I remembered, with kind eyes and a familiar lopsided grin. "Jason Wells." He laughed. "You remember me?" "Of course I do. 7th grade science fair. You built a solar oven out of pizza boxes." "That thing never worked," he said, shaking his head. "You helped me rebuild it the night before judging. You stayed after school even when no one else would." I hadn't thought about that in years. "What are you doing here?" I asked. "My grandma just moved in last week." "Margaret Wells. Room 206. I grinned. "I love her already. She sings Ella Fitzgerald at breakfast." He looked relieved. "That sounds like her." We caught up for a few minutes before he headed upstairs. After his visit, he stopped by the desk again. "I know this is kind of random, but you want to grab a coffee sometime?" I hesitated. Not because I didn't want to, but because I hadn't let anyone new into my life in a long time. Still, something about Jason felt safe. Familiar in the best way. "Sure," I said. "I'd like that." Over the next few months, we met for coffee on slow afternoons and took walks by Lake Mendota. Jason worked remotely for a tech company based in Denver, which meant his hours were flexible. He was patient, quiet in a thoughtful way, never pushed me to share more than I wanted to. One snowy evening, we sat in his car watching the plows clear University Avenue. "You ever think about going back?" he asked gently. "To them?" He nodded. I exhaled, fogging up the window. "Not really. Not after the way it ended." He didn't press, just sat with me in the silence. "They're missing out," he said finally. I looked at him surprised. "You always stood up for people. Even when it cost you. That takes guts. Not many people have that kind of heart." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just looked away, blinking fast. In the quiet that followed, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Seen. The next day at Langdon Hills, I helped Miss Tanaka make a card for her great-granddaughter's birthday. She asked me to spell-check her note 3 times, then handed it to me like it was a treasure. "Thank you for caring," she said. My throat tightened. That night, I walked home through the snow, phone buzzing in my pocket. Another tagged photo of Brielle in a bridal boutique, mom and dad beaming at her side. I deleted the app. Then I stood on the porch of my apartment, stared up at the quiet winter sky, and for the first time in years felt like I belonged exactly where I was. It started with a letter from the facility director at Willow Glen. I had just finished reviewing medication logs when it landed on my desk, slid over with an apologetic smile from Julie, our lead administrator. It was from my grandmother, Margaret Hartley, addressed in her careful script. "Camille, I hope you're well. I've been moved to Willow Glen for recovery. They tell me you're working nearby. I'd love to see you if it's not too much trouble. Yours, Margaret." I stared at the letter for a long time. My chest tightened in a way I hadn't felt in years. I hadn't spoken to anyone in my family since the day I was accused of stealing, but Grandma had always been different. She had sent me birthday cards every single year without fail. When no one else remembered I existed, she did. 2 days later, I walked into Willow Glen during my lunch break and asked to visit room 118. She was sitting up in bed, hair swept back in a low bun, reading a worn copy of Little Women. When she saw me, her face lit up. "I was wondering if you'd come." I smiled, stepping into the room. "You're hard to say no to." She chuckled, setting the book aside. "They tell me you work in elder care now." "I'm not surprised. You were always the one with the softest hands." We didn't talk about the past that day, just shared tea and stories and quiet laughter. She asked me about my job, my apartment, whether I still liked lemon cookies. I didn't realize how much I'd missed hearing someone call me sweetheart. From that day on, I visited her once a month. We kept it quiet. She asked me not to tell the rest of the family. She didn't want the drama. Said it would only cause more damage. I agreed. She had suffered a minor stroke a few months earlier. Nothing too serious, but enough to require help with mobility and medication. Her short-term memory flickered sometimes and her balance wasn't great, but her mind was still sharp, her wit intact. Over time, she started trusting me with small things. A trip to the bank. Filing insurance paperwork. Eventually, I became her medical proxy. It was all done legally privately, through the help of the facility attorney. She wanted someone responsible, someone who listened, someone who wouldn't disappear when things got hard. I never told her how much it meant to hear that. One afternoon in early December, I brought her a new sweater. She hated the scratchy gowns the facility handed out and preferred her own soft clothes. I found a deep plum cardigan and matching socks. As I helped her slip it on, she looked at me and said, her voice soft, "You know, Camille, you're the only one who still calls me grandma." I paused, fingers on the buttons. Of course I do. She nodded, her eyes far away. Brielle used to call me every Sunday. Then she got busy. I haven't seen her since her engagement party. That was over a year ago. I said nothing. Just finished buttoning the sweater and helped her back into bed. She reached for my hand. I may not have much time left. I want to make sure the right person is in place. Someone who thinks of more than just herself. The room felt suddenly very still. I'm not asking for anything, she added quickly. I just need peace of mind. You have it, I whispered. Later that week, I received a letter from her attorney confirming I had been added to her power of attorney documents. It came with a simple note from Grandma. Thank you for showing up when no one else did. I tucked it into my journal and never mentioned it to anyone. Meanwhile, my feed remained full of Brielle's wedding preparations. Champagne tastings, floral samples, try-on sessions with 6 different photographers. She had started a bridal blog called Becoming Mrs. Carlisle. I glanced at it once and felt like I was reading the diary of someone I'd never met. There were no mentions of family, no pictures of Grandma. Just filtered selfies and curated joy. I never judged her for wanting happiness. I just didn't understand why it required forgetting the people who had always been there. One night I found Grandma humming at the window, staring out at the snowy courtyard. "What's on your mind?" she smiled faintly. My hands are slower now, but my mind still wanders. I've been thinking about what we leave behind. Not money or houses, but how we make people feel. Who we show up for. Who we love quietly. She turned to look at me. You've loved me quietly for a long time. That matters more than any inheritance. I felt my throat tighten. You've always mattered to me. And you always will, she said. She didn't ask for promises, she didn't make grand declarations. But in that moment, sitting by her bed with snow falling outside, I knew that the one person who had ever really seen me was still here, and I would protect that however I could. When the invitation arrived, I read it 3 times before setting it down. You are warmly invited to Christmas dinner, hosted by Margaret Hartley, the 25th of December 2019, 6:00 p.m., at the Hartley residence, Springfield, Illinois. There was no note, no flourish, just the careful elegance of Grandma's handwriting and her return address in the corner. It was the first time in years I had seen my parents' home written on anything that was meant for me. I stared at it for a full minute before folding it closed and placing it on my kitchen counter. I didn't RSVP. I didn't ask questions. But on Christmas morning, I packed an overnight bag, got in my car, and drove 3.5 hours through snow-dusted roads back to the town I once swore I'd never return to. The Hartley house hadn't changed. The blue shutters were still crooked. The porch light still flickered twice before staying on. But everything else felt different. Smaller, dimmer. Like the house had aged without warmth. I knocked once before letting myself in. The front door creaked the same way it always had. For a moment, no one noticed me. Then Mom appeared in the hallway wearing a red cardigan I didn't recognize and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Camille. Hi. She stepped forward to hug me and I let her. Her arms felt thinner. Her perfume had changed. Dad came next, his expression unreadable. He offered a handshake, which I ignored. We hugged stiffly. Brielle stood in the living room radiant in a gold sweater and black pants, holding a flute of champagne. She raised it slightly like a toast. "Long time no see." I didn't reply, just nodded. Jake wasn't there. I noticed that immediately. Neither of my parents mentioned him. Dinner was awkward from the first bite. Everyone spoke in polite fragments, circling topics without touching anything real. They asked about my job like they already knew the answers, offered compliments that sounded rehearsed. Brielle laughed too loudly at things that weren't funny. Mom kept fidgeting with her napkin. Dad checked his watch 3 times. Grandma sat at the head of the table, silent and smiling, watching all of us like she was memorizing something. When dessert was cleared and coffee poured, she tapped her spoon against her cup. "I have something for Camille." I froze. She reached beneath her chair and pulled out a small velvet box. Dark green, tied with a faded gold ribbon. She handed it to me without ceremony. "Open it, sweetheart." My fingers trembled as I untied the ribbon and opened the lid. Inside was a delicate gold chain, the one I thought I would never see again. The necklace. The one Brielle had accused me of stealing 5 years earlier. The same necklace that tore our family apart. I couldn't breathe. I looked up. Grandma's eyes were steady. "You left it in my upstairs guest room that spring, tucked inside a tissue under the dresser. I found it after you left." My mouth opened but no sound came out. "I didn't know what to do with it," she continued. "I knew if I gave it back, then no one would have believed me. Or you." There was complete silence around the table. I waited, thinking someone would speak, deny it, laugh, do something. But no one moved. Dad looked like the air had been knocked out of him. Mom's eyes were wide, lips parted. Brielle turned pale, her mouth tightening. Grandma placed her hand on mine. "I kept it safe for you. I knew one day the time would come." Brielle stood up, suddenly knocking her napkin to the floor. "That's not possible." Grandma didn't flinch. "It's the truth." Brielle looked at our parents, but neither of them said a word. I let the silence stretch, tasting it, breathing it in. No one apologized. No one defended themselves. Grandma turned to the rest of the table. "I think we've all made mistakes. But some mistakes come with consequences, and some people carry wounds much longer than they deserve to." Her words hung heavy in the air. I closed the box, holding it in both hands. "Thank you," I whispered. She nodded. "That necklace may be gold, but what's more valuable is knowing who you are. You knew. Even when no one else did." The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the quiet. Brielle sat back down slowly, her gaze fixed on the tablecloth. No one looked me in the eye. The evening ended not with hugs or warm goodbyes, but with coats and silence and a cold front settling over the room. As I stepped out onto the porch, the snow had started again. Tiny flakes drifting softly through the light. I stood there a long time, holding that little green box to my chest, knowing what had just shifted couldn't be undone. And that maybe for the first time I had finally been seen. The silence after Christmas should have felt peaceful, but it didn't. It felt like the stillness before a storm. 2 days later, my phone lit up with a number I didn't recognize. I let it ring out. A voicemail followed, short and hesitant. "Camille, it's Mom. I was hoping we could talk. Please call when you have a moment." I listened twice just to be sure I hadn't imagined the tremor in her voice. Then I deleted it. By the end of that week, I had 5 more messages. 1 from Dad. 1 from our old landline. 2 more from Mom. 1 from Brielle. I ignored every single one. Then the mail started coming. A holiday card with a picture of the 3 of them smiling stiffly by the fireplace, no Jake in sight. A handwritten note from Dad tucked inside. "Let's not dwell on the past, let's move forward." I stared at that sentence for a long time. I remembered standing in our driveway 5 years ago, clutching a trash bag full of my things, hearing him say, "We can't have a thief under this roof." And now he wanted to move forward. I didn't respond. Then a week into January, I came home from work to find someone sitting on the stairs outside my apartment building. It took me a second to realize it was Brielle. She stood when she saw me. Her designer coat hung looser than I remembered. Her perfectly blow-dried hair was pulled back in a limp ponytail. She looked small, out of place. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. She took that as permission. Jake left me. I said nothing. He broke it off a month before the wedding. Said I was manipulative. Controlling. I guess I didn't see it coming. I kept walking past her toward the door. She followed. I also lost my job. I paused. They said I created a hostile work environment. That I played favorites. That I made things toxic. Her voice cracked. I was just trying to keep things in order, Camille. I turned to face her. Did you ever think maybe people just got tired of you lying? She blinked. I didn't come here to fight. Why did you come? Because everything's falling apart. And I don't know where else to turn. And suddenly there it was. The truth, naked and raw. She didn't miss me. She missed the comfort. The advantage. The control. I opened the front door. Go home, Brielle. She stepped forward. Wait. Mom and Dad, they're drowning. They took out a loan to pay for the wedding. $85,000. The venue, the dress, the catering. All of it non-refundable. And now they're stuck. That's not my problem. They thought you'd understand. Understand what? That the people who kicked me out for something I didn't do are now facing the consequences of the daughter they chose instead. She looked like I had slapped her. That's not fair. No, what wasn't fair was being thrown out with no proof, no apology, and no voice. What wasn't fair was watching you smirk while they packed my bags. Her lips trembled. We made mistakes. You made choices. A long silence hung between us. We thought, maybe now that Grandma trusts you that you'd help. We could be a family again. There it was. The hook, not love, not forgiveness. Leverage. I stepped back. You don't want family, you want access. Camille. Good night, Brielle. I shut the door. She stood there for another minute, then walked away. I didn't watch her go. I didn't need to. Later that night, I got a text from my father. We're willing to forgive and forget. We just want to be whole again. Please think about it. Forgive and forget. I stared at those words like they were in another language. I remembered every slammed door. Every avoided birthday. Every year, Grandma quietly kept me afloat while they pretended I didn't exist. They weren't reaching out because they missed me. They were reaching out because they were losing everything else. The golden girl had lost her shine. The golden future had collapsed. And now they were scrambling for a backup plan. I walked to my dresser, pulled out the small green box again. The necklace glinted under the lamp, still delicate, still whole. Just like me. They had chosen who mattered 5 years ago. And now they were discovering the price. I put the box away, gently turned off the light, and let the quiet wrap around me like armor. They could call, they could plead, they could send letters and flowers and guilt, but they were not coming back to me. They were coming back to what I had become. And what I could give them. And I wouldn't give them anything. Not this time, not anymore. A week passed before the next knock came. It was late, just after 8, and I was cleaning up the last few dishes from dinner. Jason had stopped by earlier with soup and a tired smile, but he had gone home before sunset. I wasn't expecting anyone. The knock came again. Firmer this time. I opened the door slowly, expecting maybe a delivery mistake or a neighbor needing help with their car. Instead, my parents stood in the hallway. Mom looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her hair was pulled back loosely, eyes, red hands clasped tightly in front of her. Dad looked older than I remembered, like the years had finally caught up with him. They didn't say anything at first, then as if rehearsed, both of them dropped to their knees. I froze. Behind me, Jason appeared from the hallway, having come back to return a book I'd lent him. He stopped in his tracks, taking in the scene. Mom's voice cracked. We're sorry. Dad's eyes filled. Please, Camille. You're all we have left. Jason stepped beside me, uncertain. I held up a hand gently. It's okay, I said. I've got this. I turned back to them. You should come inside. They followed me in slowly, like unsure guests not quite believing the invitation. We sat in silence at the kitchen table, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound. I poured them each a glass of water but didn't sit. "It's been 5 years," I said. 5 years of nothing. "We know," Mom whispered. "And now you come here." Why? Dad looked at the floor. "Because we were wrong." I waited. "We thought we were protecting Brielle," Mom said. "We thought you had drifted." "You mean stolen?" She flinched. "We were foolish. We believed what we wanted to believe. Because it was easier than believing the truth." She nodded slowly. I crossed my arms. "Do you remember summer of 2017? You had that accident. The one with the ladder. Dad broke his leg, needed surgery. Insurance didn't cover everything. They were going to delay the procedure." He blinked. "Yes. We didn't know what we were going to do. Then suddenly it was covered. The hospital told us someone paid the remainder anonymously. That was me." Their mouths parted in tandem. I had just landed my first full-time job. I used the emergency fund I had saved from working at the cafe. "You never knew because I didn't want you to know. I didn't do it to be recognized." Mom started crying. "Why?" "Because despite everything, you were still my father." Jason had quietly moved to the living room, giving us space, but I could see him watching from the corner of his eye. "I helped because I thought maybe, just maybe, you'd feel that someone still cared. Even if you never knew who." Dad wiped his face with the back of his hand. His voice broke. "We don't deserve your forgiveness. You don't. We failed you, Camille, as parents. As people." I nodded. "I know." They looked so small. So human. No longer the towering figures from my childhood. Just two broken people realizing what they had destroyed. I sat down finally across from them. "Here's what I need you to understand." I waited until they looked at me. "I spent years trying to earn your love. I bent over backwards, tried to be the daughter you could be proud of, and still, I was always second to Brielle. Even when I was silent, even when I stayed out of your way. You saw me as inconvenient." Mom sobbed softly into her sleeve. "I was the one who called Grandma every week. I was the one who made sure she got to her appointments. I was the one who knew her favorite brand of tea. And still, I never expected her to give me anything. I just wanted her to feel loved." Dad swallowed hard. "You were the only one who ever put anyone else before yourself." I shook my head. "I'm not telling you this to guilt you. I'm telling you this so you understand why I'm not going to pretend everything's okay now." "We don't expect that," Mom whispered. "Good. Because this isn't forgiveness. Not yet, this is acknowledgement." Dad reached across the table slowly, his hand open. I hesitated, then placed mine over his for a brief moment. I stood. "You're welcome to go now." They both stood, lingering for a moment. "We're truly sorry," Camille, Mom said. I believe that I said quietly. "But sorry doesn't change what happened. And I've stopped hoping it ever will." They nodded, then walked to the door. As I closed it behind them, I leaned against it, exhaling slowly. Jason walked over, still holding the book I had lent him. "You okay?" I nodded. That felt like closure. Maybe not closure, but at least the beginning of something honest. He handed me the book and smiled. "You want tea?" "Yeah. That'd be nice." As the kettle boiled, I looked out the window at the street below, my parents' car driving off into the cold Madison night. I didn't know if we'd speak again. But for the first time, they had come to me not as accusers, not as manipulators, but as people who had finally seen what they lost, and I had nothing left to prove. Under the soft snow of February, the letter arrived. It was slipped under my door in a plain manila envelope, no return address, just my name typed neatly on the front. Inside was a notice from the Dane County Circuit Court. My parents and Brielle had filed a petition contesting Grandma Margaret's will. They claimed undue influence. According to the document, they believed I had manipulated a vulnerable elder for personal gain and sought an investigation into the circumstances of the estate transfer. I stared at the words, my hands shaking. It wasn't just a letter, it was a declaration of war. The next morning, I called Ethan Maddox. We hadn't spoken in nearly 2 years. The last time had been a polite exchange at a mutual friend's wedding. But I remembered how he had helped another colleague through a messy family probate battle and figured if anyone could navigate this storm it was him. He picked up on the second ring. Camille Hartley. Been a while. I know, I said. But I really need your help. By noon, we were seated in a quiet booth at a diner on Park Street, documents spread between us. Ethan's sharp eyes scanning every line like a surgeon reviewing scans before an operation. They're going after capacity, he said, finally setting down the last page. They're arguing Grandma wasn't mentally competent when she updated her will. That's ridiculous. She was more lucid than anyone I know. Doesn't matter, they'll try to paint a picture. Isolated elder caretaker with access sudden inheritance shift. It's a classic setup. My stomach twisted. Also, they're alleging emotional coercion. That you used your relationship to manipulate her decisions. I felt like I might be sick. Ethan tapped the table gently. We'll fight it. But you need to prepare. This won't stay quiet. He was right. 2 days later, my supervisor at the care facility pulled me into her office. She looked uncomfortable. Camille, with everything going on, administration feels it's best to place you on temporary leave until this is resolved. I blinked. I haven't been charged with anything. There's no proof of wrongdoing, it's just precautionary. You know how these things look. We're a small facility. Public trust matters. Public trust. I walked home that afternoon feeling like the ground had tilted beneath me. By the time I reached my apartment, my phone was already buzzing with a flood of notifications. Someone had posted an article online. Local caregiver accused of manipulating elderly grandmother in inheritance dispute. My photo pulled from an old LinkedIn profile sat under the headline. I clicked the comments against my better judgment. If this is true, she's a monster. People like that shouldn't be working with seniors. Looks sweet but clearly knows how to play the game. My hands clenched around the phone. I knew exactly where it had come from. Later that night, I created a fake account. I started digging. It didn't take long to find it. A Reddit thread titled, "My Sister Stole My Inheritance" had gone viral. The user Sunflower Truth 88 described in painful detail how her older sister manipulated their dying grandmother into rewriting her will, kicking the rest of the family out in the process. I scrolled, recognizing pieces of my life twisted beyond recognition. Dates altered. Names changed. But the story was mine. And the comments were filled with sympathy. Poor girl. Her sister sounds like a sociopath. Can someone check on that grandma? Hope she's safe. I knew the writing style. The turn of phrase. The subtle digs. It was Brielle. She had always known how to sway a crowd, first in school elections, then in corporate meetings. Now behind the glow of a screen, she was weaponizing narrative like a scalpel. Ethan called again the next morning. Camille, we need to go on the offense. File a motion to dismiss based on lack of evidence. But more than that, we need to control the story. I'm not a public figure. No, but right now people are being given one side. And it's working. I didn't answer right away. Because the truth was I was tired. Tired of being attacked. Tired of defending myself for things I never did. Tired of my family painting me as the villain in their crumbling fairy tale. Ethan's voice softened. They're doing this because they're afraid. They know they lost the only person who actually cared. And now they're trying to rewrite history. I took a breath. Let's fight it. Good. But I need to warn you. Brielle's playing dirty. She has no shame and no limits. We need witnesses. Documentation. Anything that shows you were acting out of love, not greed. I'll start pulling records. Grandma wrote letters. We had texts. I can get copies from the care facility where she lived before moving here. Ethan sounded relieved. Perfect. And Camille, yeah, you're not alone in this. That night I sat on the floor of my closet digging through old boxes until I found a faded shoebox tucked in the back. Inside were birthday cards from Grandma, notes written in her tight, elegant handwriting. Grocery lists we'd made together. A drawing I had done of her holding my hand at the farmer's market. Proof of a relationship no one else had cared to build. They could smear my name. They could throw court dates and camera crews and digital firestorms my way. But they couldn't erase the truth. They couldn't undo what was real. And I was done letting them define me. The email landed in my inbox at 2:13 in the morning. Subject from your old neighbor. The sender was Marion Bennett. I hadn't seen or heard from her in years. She had lived across the street from Grandma Margaret for as long as I could remember, one of those kind but firm widows who always had a fresh pie on the windowsill and a running opinion on everyone's lawn care. I opened it cautiously. Hi Camille, I've been following what's been said about you in the news, and I can't stay quiet any longer. I've saved photos and videos over the years. Thought they might be helpful, let me know if you want them. I'm also willing to make a statement. You are the only one who ever came to see your grandmother. The only one. Attached were 10 image files and 4 short video clips. The first was a snapshot of me and Grandma sitting on the porch, sipping tea. Date stamped April of 2021. Another showed me helping her into a car with her walker. One video caught my voice reading a letter out loud to her in the garden while Marion watered her begonias in the background. My chest tightened. There was even a scanned copy of a handwritten letter from Grandma to Marion. Camille visits me every month, even when it snows. She brings me the tea I like and helps organize my pills. Brielle never comes. She only texts if she needs something. I sent the files to Ethan first thing that morning. By noon the tone had changed. The local paper that had once featured a smug photo of Brielle under the headline "Daughter Denied" had now published a new piece titled "Neighbor Defends Caregiver in Inheritance Feud." Marion had gone public. She had given interviews, submitted her photos, and read part of Grandma's letter aloud on a local radio segment. By the next day, other voices joined in. A nurse from the facility where Grandma had spent her final years. A retired mail carrier who remembered seeing me show up month after month, even during storms. A community librarian who had watched me print out insurance forms and medication guides. The narrative shifted. Suddenly, I wasn't the manipulator. I was the granddaughter who showed up when no one else did. On Wednesday, I got a call from my supervisor. "We'd like you to return to work, Camille. We owe you an apology." I started back that Friday. No reporters came to the nursing home. No one ambushed me on the sidewalk. The noise had begun to die down. Because the court had ruled. Lack of evidence. No merit to the claim. Case dismissed. Just like that, the attempt to drag me into legal chaos had collapsed. Brielle and my parents were not only denied but publicly admonished in the official ruling for bringing forth a baseless, emotionally damaging accusation. Ethan forwarded me a transcript from the judge's statement. It is deeply concerning when family members fabricate or inflate claims during grief or financial stress. Miss Hartley demonstrated through third-party testimony and documentation that her relationship with the decedent was long-standing, genuine, and uncoerced. I didn't know what justice was supposed to feel like. But I didn't feel triumphant, I felt exhausted. The emails from reporters continued. So did invitations to speak on podcasts appear on local television op-eds. I declined everyone. Instead, I went back to the place that had always grounded me. The halls of Cedar Pines smelled the same. Fresh coffee in the common room. Linoleum polished just enough to reflect the morning sun. Residents nodded at me like nothing had ever happened. I resumed my shifts. Checked medications. Listened to Dolores talk about her dog she missed. Helped Mr. Kennedy fix the strap on his walker. Normal things. Real things. One afternoon while organizing some old files in the office, I found a note that had fallen behind a drawer. It was in Grandma's handwriting. "If you find this, Camille, it means I probably forgot to give it to you." It was a small note, just a few lines on a yellow pad. "I'm proud of the woman you've become. You don't need this family to define your worth. You already know who you are. That's more than most people figure out in a lifetime." I pressed the note to my chest, closed my eyes, and breathed. Outside the court, Brielle had remained silent. She deleted the Reddit post. Locked her social media. Went dark. There was no apology, no retraction, no admission. Just absence. My parents issued a vague statement saying they regretted pursuing legal options and hoped for family healing. I didn't respond. Not because I didn't care, but because the silence was my boundary now. And I would protect it. Justice hadn't come from a courtroom. It hadn't come from a headline. It had come from the quiet truth, the people who remembered the ones who had watched when no one thought to look. Sometimes the people who save you aren't family by blood. They're the neighbor who never forgot what they saw. They're the coworker who keeps your name safe when others don't. They're the version of yourself who refuses to break even when everyone else demands it. And for once, I didn't have to explain who I was to anyone. I had already proved it. The sun was setting over Madison when the call came, casting the sky in that strange golden haze that makes everything feel both warm and fragile. I had just clocked out of my shift at Cedar Pines and was halfway through brewing a pot of chamomile when my phone rang. The name on the screen made my stomach twist. Carol Hartley. I let it ring twice before answering. "Camille," she said, her voice thin and hoarse. "Your father. He's in the hospital. Stroke. We're at Lakeside General." There was a pause, like she expected me to hang up. We don't know what to do. They're asking for next of kin. Brielle isn't picking up. It's bad. I didn't say anything. Just stared out the window at the quiet street below, the tea forgotten. "Please, Camille. He's asking for you." An hour later, Jason and I pulled into the parking garage of the hospital. He didn't ask why I wanted to go, he just drove. That was the thing about Jason. He always understood the space between what I said and what I didn't. Inside, the hospital smelled like antiseptic and distant grief. I found my mother in the ICU waiting room, sitting small and still in one of those plastic chairs that made everyone look older. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her mouth trembling even when it was closed. I didn't hug her. "Room 412, she said, quietly standing up. My father looked nothing like the man I remembered. Gone was the stiff-jawed authority, the thunder in his voice. What remained was a pale man in a paper gown, eyes sunken, one arm limp at his side. Machines beeped steadily around him. A soft oxygen hiss filled the room. He turned his head toward me, slow, as if the movement hurt. "Camille," he whispered. His eyes searched mine. I didn't move closer, just stood near the door. "I didn't think you'd come." I wasn't sure I would either. He closed his eyes, and for a long moment we sat in silence, the kind of silence where nothing needs to be said because everything already has. After a while, my mother entered. She looked at me with a kind of desperation that felt unfamiliar. Like all the power she'd once held had slipped through her fingers and she didn't know who to be without it. "We were wrong," she said quietly. "About so much." My chest stayed still. It's just us now. Brielle. She's not here. She won't answer. She left town 2 weeks ago. Took a job in Seattle. She didn't even call. I blinked. The words should have stung. They didn't. They just felt expected. "You're the only one left, Camille." I studied her face. For the first time, she looked like someone who understood what being alone truly meant. I walked down to the front desk and asked to speak to billing. The nurse behind the counter gave me a puzzled look when I offered my card. "You're not listed as primary family contact." "I know," I said. "Doesn't matter." She printed a receipt and I signed without looking at the number. I didn't do it for them. I did it because someone needed to. I returned to the ICU and handed my mother a manila envelope. Inside are the prescriptions, discharge instructions, and the rehab clinic referral. I've also arranged for transportation to get him there. She stared down at the envelope like it was written in a language she didn't understand. I paused at the door, turned to look at them one last time. I'm not here for apologies. I'm not angry anymore. But don't mistake that for reconciliation. I helped because I could. Not because I owe you. I'm not trying to punish you. I've just stopped trying to belong where I was never welcome. Neither of them said a word. Outside, the wind had picked up. Jason waited in the car with the heat running. "Did it go how you thought it would?" he asked, glancing at me gently. "I don't know," I said. But I didn't walk out of there needing anything from them. And that feels like enough. We drove through the quiet streets past the frozen lake, the neighborhood strung with leftover holiday lights. I watched the reflections blur across the window and thought about how strange grief could be. How it sometimes didn't arrive when someone died, but when you finally stopped wishing they'd been different. Later that night, I pulled out an old photo of me and Grandma Margaret. It had been taken on the porch of her old house. I was probably 12, holding a plastic cup of lemonade. She was laughing at something I'd just said, eyes crinkled with joy. She'd once told me that real love isn't loud. It shows up in small, quiet ways. In who remembers your favorite tea. In who sits with you when you're tired. In who lets you go when holding on hurts too much. I hadn't taken revenge. I hadn't yelled or blamed or tried to make them feel the weight of what they did. I just walked away. And sometimes that's the only justice we get. Not their regret, not their apology, just our peace. And the knowledge that we chose differently. That we chose better. Spring came slower that year. The snow lingered a little longer than usual, as if the world itself was reluctant to let go. It was a gray Tuesday morning when the call came. Margaret Hartley had passed in her sleep. The nurse said it was peaceful. No pain. No struggle. Just a soft exhale into silence. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time after that call, fingers curled around a cup of lukewarm coffee, staring out the window as raindrops traced quiet lines down the glass. I had known it was coming. Still, when it did, it carved a hollow through my chest like nothing else had. Margaret wasn't just my grandmother. She was the only person who had ever seen me without needing a reason. Who had believed in me not because I was useful or impressive, but simply because I was me. The funeral was held in a small chapel on the edge of town. She hadn't wanted anything grand. Just flowers from her garden, a hymn or two, and no long speeches. I kept it just the way she would have wanted. Jason stood quietly by my side the entire time. After the final hymn, after the last of the guests trickled out, he gently took my hand and led me outside. It was there, just past the stone walkway under the old oak tree, where she used to take me to read as a child, that he knelt down on one knee. He didn't say anything elaborate. Just looked up at me with those clear, steady eyes and asked if I would build the next chapter of my life with him. I said yes. Later that week, her attorney reached out. She hadn't left behind a grand estate. No shocking revelations. Just a single handwritten letter tucked neatly into a plain envelope. It wasn't addressed to the family. It was addressed only to me. Inside was her familiar cursive written in violet ink. Camille, I never said it enough, but I watched you grow into someone who loved without expecting anything in return. When others failed, you stayed kind. When they forgot me, you came. Not for credit, not for reward. Just because it was the right thing to do. You are the heart I hoped this family would have. There is no great fortune to leave you, only this, my trust, my name, and my love. And this one truth I hope you'll never forget. You were the only one who never stopped caring. Love, Grandma. I cried for a long time after reading it. Not out of grief, but release. For everything I had carried silently for so many years, for every moment, I had wondered if I was wrong to keep loving people who never saw me. She had seen me. That was enough. In the weeks that followed, I used what little she had left behind to start something she would have believed in. The Margaret Hartley Fund. A small nonprofit built to support elderly people who had no family to care for them. A grant here, a support group there, even a holiday dinner program for isolated seniors in the community. It wasn't big, not yet. But it was real. Brielle never came to the funeral. The last I heard, she had moved out west, trying to rebrand herself under a different last name. I didn't follow her story. I didn't care to. My parents sent a card. No apology, just 2 lines written in shaky handwriting. We miss her. We hope you're doing well. I didn't reply. The chapter with them had closed. Not out of anger, out of peace. Some stories don't need a dramatic ending. Sometimes the ending is just quiet. I still walk by the old park where Grandma used to push me on the swings. I visit her grave once a month, leave a sprig of lavender, and sit for a while. Jason joins me sometimes. Other times I go alone. And in those still moments, I think about all the times I waited for someone to say they were proud of me. To say I mattered. and how in the end the only voice that ever truly did was hers. I never wanted revenge. I never needed to be proven right. All I ever wanted was to love and be loved in return. Now I finally am. If you've ever been the one who cared too much even when no one noticed, I hope you know this story is for you. And if your story feels unfinished, I hope you'll share it. Because somewhere out there someone's listening. Someone who sees you. So tell me your story in the comments. And if this one spoke to you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay with us for the next journey. You're not alone. Not anymore.